Good evening from Charlotte. I'm James Brierton. It's Wednesday, August 14th, 2024. This week, recapping Tropical Storm Debby. And what a storm it was. Tropical Storm Debby going down in the record books. We'll talk about the impacts here in North Carolina and in South Carolina with our colleague Jared Smith, who covered live severe weather from Tropical Storm Debby across the greater Charleston area as that storm came ashore. Jared, it's good to see you on a calmer night. How are you?
Oh, good. A lot better than I was about a week ago. It's been nice. It was a beautiful day, actually. So,
It was.
it's really nice to not have rain uh, and not feel like walk outside and feel like you're going to melt. So,
Yes.
yeah, can't complain.
Humidity and dew points will be back. We're scrolling the names of our Patreon supporters, including some of our new supporters who joined us during Tropical Storm Debby. Thank you for your support, whether you're new or existing. Patreon.com/Carolina Weather Group. You can join names like Tim Parks to help support the Carolina Weather Group. Starting at just $1, you help keep the lights on. We appreciate your support. During this week's show, we are going to recap some of what we saw during Tropical Storm Debby. But of course, the storm lasted so long and impacted so many areas. We're going to try to get to as much as possible. And if you're listening on our audio podcast feed, we'll try to paint a picture of any of the maps or images we're showing. But of course, we won't even have time to get to all of it. So if you want to chime in, join the discussion live on Facebook or YouTube, you can comment with what you saw. Be sure to tell us where you were and maybe what you saw out your window or in your community. But Jared, I think we'll hop right on in, starting with some of the impacts we saw in South Carolina. These maps courtesy of our friends at the South Carolina Climate Office. And shout out to the climate offices because they took what the Weather Service did in real time and they entered it into the history books. When you really think about that division between weather and climate, let's talk a little bit here about the highest rainfall totals across South Carolina. We'll get to North Carolina in just a moment, but South Carolina with 22 inches of rain. That is insane. How is Monk's Corner doing, Jared?
Well, Monk's Corner is actually doing a little bit better. What was crazy about that rain is that was on Friday. A lot of that fell on Friday. There was a persistent band of rain that set up Friday night, and it was still raining. I went to bed and I looked at the radar one more time, and I woke up and it was still raining. The radar looked like it hadn't moved, and it dropped, 8 inches easily in a lot of places. And so Monk's Corner, they had significant flash flooding only a few days after they had a tornado come through. So it was a rough few days in Monk's Corner. They're doing better now, but the rivers are still having trouble. The Edisto is just now fallen under major flood. The Santee is in minor flood. And the Ashley River is still above the record it set in 2015, in the October 2015 1,000-year event, if you can believe that.
I'm showing on the screen right now from the Weather Service office in Charleston. So this would be places like Myrtle Beach and Wilmington here. Or no, I'm sorry, this is Wilmington's office. You can see all of those flood warnings that continue for rivers right now. And Jared, we actually saw in live time one of those flash flood emergencies that was playing out. I don't even remember what night it was, right? But in North Carolina, we were getting goosebumps as they were cordoning off entire towns that were just being inundated by the flooding. And so we'll talk more about North Carolina in a moment. But I thought your point was very pertinent about the rain started early and it lasted really long. And I watched for South Carolina in particular, because you guys got it first, right? Obviously, as the storm came ashore, and by ashore, I mean made a second landfall in South Carolina after making one in Florida as a hurricane. It spun offshore, off the shore of South Carolina, came ashore. And then because the way it was rotating, not only did you guys get that first brunt, but by the time it was raining here in Charlotte, you guys were still getting whiplashed almost by the bottom end of the storm. And it was semi-intense at times, it looked like.
Yeah, especially, I'll tell you what, I mean, I think some of the most intense rain rates we had beyond that night that we were on, for Lord knows, that ungodly hour that we were on talking about tornadoes. I think the most significant rainfall happened, I would say, Friday when the storm was lifting out. We had some breaks in the clouds that day, and it was actually saw some blue sky. For a minute there, we were all making jokes about, hey, look, the sky is actually blue. And then before you know it, because it had warmed to 90-something degrees, thunderstorms fired, and that moisture was still there, and there was a lot to wring out, and there was a lot of forcing there. There was some assistance aloft. that came through and helped to keep that those thunderstorms going. So Friday was really,
Hmm.
was particularly bad. Friday night into Saturday. So, it was kind of funny, kind of in the middle there. People were like, "Oh, okay, this isn't bad. We can
Well,
handle this," because our rain rates were not too, you know, when after the band came through, Monday night into Tuesday, it wasn't that bad. It wasn't that bad for a couple days, and then
but then it
Friday,
never left. It never left.
no, it never left. And then Friday happened, and a lot of people thought that they were probably in the clear, and I don't blame them. I mean, the skies are turning
Yeah.
blue, but I remember that Thursday night when we were on and talking about Debbie. I remember we were looking at the high res, and I was like, "Oh, that is a big blow up of thunderstorms on the southern
You're
flank
right.
of that." That
Hmm.
looked, huh, and I'm sitting here as like, "Oh wow, that looks overdone." No, it wasn't overdone, and in fact,
Yeah.
if anything, it was underdone.
Yeah, let's look at more of the South Carolina rainfall totals. Again, we'll get to North Carolina in a minute, right? But we were forecasting, we were relaying the warnings from the Hurricane Center, the folks who look at this stuff all the time saying coastal South Carolina is going to see historic flooding, 20 to 30 inches of rainfall. And we got into that 20 to 30 inches. Did we get 30? No, thank goodness. But Monk's Corner coming in at 22 inches, that makes Debbie the second, preliminarily, all time rainfall record only behind Florence in 2018. Mind you, those dates really close together. Matthew in 2016 rounding out fourth place. We could go on a whole side tangent about climate and excessive rainfall. We'll save that for another time. But here are some of those statewide totals that we saw. Berkeley, 22 inches. That's the Monk's Corner one. Jared, we know that Dorchester saw 18, almost 19 inches of rain. And
Yep.
what also strikes me is the variety or the range, right? So
Mm.
way upstate in Greenville, South Carolina, they only saw 1 inch and a third. And so it's plausible that somebody there, like somebody here in Charlotte, said, well, yeah, it got rain, but it wasn't nearly as bad as they said it was going to be. I don't think we ever said that everyone was going to get 30 inches of rain. We said somebody's going to get 30 inches of rain. And that, for the most part, verified here.
Yeah, I mean, again, when you're second to Florence, which is not that long ago. I
Not that
mean,
long ago.
it is not that long ago, which became the benchmark storm for tropical cyclone flooding in the state. And so we have Debbie coming in right behind it and kind of in the same situation. Storm stalls out, even though just because it's it's a tropical storm doesn't mean that it's not going to cause problems. We saw that with Florence, and we definitely saw that with Debbie. We have people who are still seeing that. They're still dealing with the flooding right now, as I mentioned before. So the forecast was pretty good. Not everybody saw the 2015 style deluge where it rained hard for days and days and days on end. That didn't happen. We had more breaks this go around because it was, the setup was just different. But when it rained, to borrow from a cliche, it poured, and it
Yeah.
poured in a hurry.
I think it's also probably worth stressing that we're talking about rainfall totals. We're not talking about all of the water that then had to flow downstream.
Yep.
So we're not talking about total flooding. We're talking about how much rain fell at a particular pinpoint location from the sky. But if you are in coastal South Carolina, even coastal North Carolina, all those rivers and creeks upstream from where I am in Charlotte, from Greensboro, from Fayetteville, it's got to flow back out to the ocean. And so that is more water that is going to flow in on top of what you have. And I also want to talk about the stark contrast of really where this started to drop off, but also stressing how far inland it came. Putting the highest rainfall totals per county in South Carolina back on the screen here. Rock Hill, South Carolina in York County, 11 inches, almost 12 inches. That is practically in Charlotte. That is dramatically inland. And you can just kind of see how far in that came. And also was a bit localized because Namery, Lancaster County near Fort Mill only got 5 inches. So there were some stark localized differences. Orangeburg, 11 inches. Marlboro, 6.5. I'm doing a little rounding here, but emphasizing kind of those big numbers. Allendale got 10. Bamberg got almost 11. Beaufort, 14 and a third. So you can kind of see a lot of people got rain.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it was just based on where those convective bands set up, the path of the center and the convective bands. That's why you would say, Rock Hill, Charlotte, you would see 11, 12 inches of rain, where maybe just to the, just to the southwest in Lancaster County, just not as much, just because of, where
Yeah.
that center tracked and where those bands set up. It is incredible.
And it's possible that somebody else in Lancaster County is watching right now going, I got a lot of rain, and it's just not on the data set. Let's go across to the North Carolina side. This is now from the North Carolina Climate Office using their EcoNet. We have a show on that in our podcast history if you want to learn more about the mesonet that North Carolina has. Of course, the biggest numbers towards the coast, out towards Wilmington, out towards Carolina Beach, 8-9 inches. But you can also see as far inland as Raleigh, 4-5 inches. Greensboro with 6 inches. We're going to talk about the flooding that Greensboro saw in just a moment, but we still saw 3 or 4 inches in the foothills of Western North Carolina. We're probably lucky we didn't get more in those higher elevations, because then we would have been talking about mudslides and things
Mhm.
in that terrain. But North Carolina getting a widespread upwards of 10 inches of rain. We could have had more, but lucky for North Carolina in a way that I guess the storm came a little bit further south where it made landfall, because we could have seen higher numbers. And again, I think we probably did see higher numbers, because we did get some flash flood emergencies and very serious flooding in North Carolina. I don't want to make light of that. And while the mesonet here is great, we do also have some holes that we know probably we would have larger totals in. Calling out some of those largest rainfall totals that the Climate Office for North Carolina, Castle Hine, got 9.12 inches of total storm precipitation. Whiteville got almost 9, if we round that 8.9 tenths up. Goldsboro, about 6, almost 7. But, Greensboro really is interesting because they got 5 inches. That's a lot of rain. That is more than a month's worth of rain in one storm, but it's not the biggest on the table. However, they had flooding, just like we had here in Charlotte. This is the Little Sugar Creek Greenway in Charlotte, flooded during Tropical Storm Debby. You can see this is designed to flood. It's not supposed to look like a river. It's supposed to look like a creek. But, Greensboro had the same problems, I think, because you can see here this tweet from their police department. Huge thank you to the fire department for assisting in multiple water rescues during the storm. Their call stats put them at 14 water rescues. 24 different flooding incidences. And this was a tweet that went out on August the 10th. So it mostly encompasses what they saw during the week. We're also lucky from where I am in Charlotte that we didn't see worse flooding than we saw, because while I'm sure we had resources back here in Charlotte with our great men and women of the Charlotte Fire Department, we also know that some of those resources traveled into eastern North Carolina to assist. We have a world-renowned swiftwater rescue team here in Charlotte. Mooresville went too. And so some of those resources actually went eastward, knowing that the impact was going to be greater there. So North Carolina not, being spared by any of this flooding either. We also have maximum wind speeds that the Climate Office clocked, 20 miles an hour in the Triangle. There's not a number here for the Charlotte area. I guess Charlotte must need a mesonet, EcoNet location for the Climate Office, but I'm going to check my rooftop observations in just a moment. Closer to the shore, 25 miles an hour. Those are pretty decent wind gusts. Certainly could have been higher, could have been worse, but it was enough to topple trees. I'll talk about that in just a moment. But here are some of the maximum wind gusts. I'm sorry, that first set of numbers was sustained, because when you factor in the wind gusts, they were closer to 30 miles an hour, which does make a little bit more sense. Is that a 50 up there in the mountains? I'm sure that
Yeah.
was a sloping terrain thing.
Yeah,
But
there's a 46, there's a
there's a
50.
46.
That wouldn't surprise me,
You're right.
especially, it's kind of interesting. Debbie was an interesting storm in that the winds were not at the core of the storm. The winds were not in the inner core at all. I mean, we had a landfall fairly close by, and it was just a breezy day. You couldn't even
Yeah.
tell. But on
It was
the edges,
it was spread out.
yeah, it was possibly subtropical. I think one could make an argument that it was losing its tropical characteristics a little bit.
That is such an academic argument that I almost don't want to get into, like
I don't blame you.
subtropical,
Yeah,
post-tropical. Like, oh
yeah.
my God, it hurts my
Yeah.
head.
But all that to say is that, we had the dry air moving in. It really broadened the circulation, and really the strongest winds were found on the outskirts of the storm.
Yeah.
So, Debbie made landfall with a 65-mile-an-hour maximum sustained winds, but what that doesn't tell you is that those were well offshore in the convective bands.
Yeah. So I just looked at, I got a Tempest weather station on my roof, and we've talked about this before on the show, but it clocked 35 miles an hour during Debbie. We were
Mhm.
fine where I was, but a colleague and a friend just around the corner, it toppled a tree, totaled his
Yep.
car, damaged his roof.
You don't need much when it's raining like
Thir-
that.
35 will do it.
Yep,
35
easily.
will do it. This is a photo from the climate office. I think they relayed it from the weather service, who of course had their hands full, not only doing real-time storm warnings, but also those damage assessments in the days following. This is a photo from Sampson County, where they had an EF2 tornado. We're going to talk more about the tornadoes in just a moment, but of course that would enhance the winds. So we'll talk more about that in just a moment here as we look at this map that the climate office put together of the tornadoes in North Carolina. We'll bounce back to South Carolina in just a moment. We had 10 tornadoes produced by Debbie in North Carolina between August 6th and August 9th, 2024, including an EF3 tornado. That is insane. According to the climate office, this is the most in the state from a tropical system since the 11 that Hurricane Isaias produced in 2020. That EF3, though, in Wilson County, was only the third F3 or EF3 tornado on record in North Carolina associated with the tropical storm. It did unfortunately result in one fatality, heavily damaged a middle school there in Wilson County. But an EF3 tornado, that means winds of at least 136 miles an hour. Tropical systems are not normally known for big, giant, tornado alley like tornadoes. They're normally those quick little spin ups that are almost hard to detect. An EF3 tornado, I about fell out of my chair, Jared, when I saw that.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I remember watching, some of the chasers and some of the meteorologists in North Carolina when that was down, when that was doing damage, and the radar signature was like, "Where are we? And are we in the plains, or is this a tropical cyclone?" You don't normally see that. It can happen. And that's the other part of it too, and that's why again, when we're doing tornado coverage and all that, we don't know. You just don't know how strong something can spin up to be. We'll talk about the tornadoes here in a second.
And
I mean,
just, yeah.
yeah, I mean, we didn't have one that was above 100 miles an hour here,
Yeah.
but
Well, yeah, but you guys had your hands full, and I'll come back to that in just a moment. Looking at the map for Wilson County, if you're watching with us online right now, you can see that path from I-95 through I-795. This is that path of that EF3. I don't have any photos from the Weather Service that I can share of that. I do have pictures that WRAL, the NBC affiliate in Raleigh, shared, and you can see some of that damage from that rare EF3 as it ripped through Wilson County. We know that the governor went out there to tour the storm damage. You can see how it ripped the roof right off that school. I mean, we are so lucky that school was not in session. And when this came on through, with so many schools now going back to school. But let's also show you some of the photos we do have from the neighboring tornado near Greene County here, stretching from Highway 13 south. This is closer to Snow Hill and Hillville, and then extending up towards Lindell. You can just see some of these pictures that the Weather Service was able to share with us. This was an EF3 tornado. So this is just an idea of what an EF3 tornado with winds of at least 111 miles per hour. Looks like it took the roof off of maybe a barn, or maybe this was a parking structure, a covered parking structure. It heavily damaged this truck. You can see that would definitely be total. The roof is caved in, the windows is smashed, the engine is definitely, and I almost wonder, Jared, if this whole thing was blown back. I don't know for sure, but just looking at the way the debris was kind of blown towards that tree line.
yeah, I know, it wouldn't surprise me in the slightest. And again, I mean, you're getting into 130 miles an hour there. You're just taking the roof clean off of that, whatever structure that was. I mean, I'd argue it looked like a house. I
Yeah.
mean, that's, I mean, this
Well,
is why we don't want people in vehicles during a tornado.
or you mentioned houses. This looks like what is commonly referred to as a mobile home, a manufactured home. And we
Yeah.
constantly say that they are unfortunately not very strong against tornadoes, especially of an
Yep.
EF2 or 3 caliber. And you can kind of see that here in this structure.
Yeah.
How maybe we're lucky in a sense that one death is too many, but we didn't have more. When you look at the strength of these EF2 and EF3 tornadoes, this is somebody's home that we are looking in here. This is insane.
Yeah, and again, a lot of credit to the warning system. Uh, you get that warning. We have so many ways to get the warning to you, and people do generally do a good job of taking heed on those, and that's how we're
Yeah.
able to get away with that. But again, I agree. One death is too many. We still have work to do.
Yeah. We can show you here as we pull the map out from North Carolina to South Carolina. You can see some of the small pins. I also just want to give kudos to the National Weather Service. Every one of these little dots you see is when a weather service meteorologist goes out to do a storm survey. And we always say during a tornado warning, yeah, they're going to go out, they're going to survey. Well, what does that mean? It means they're going to go walk that line of damage. And as they go, they're going to take pictures, they're going to make observations, and they are dropping pins on a map. And this is how we as broadcasters can then relay a bit of that storm damage to you. But as we zoom the map out from South Carolina, go back towards North Carolina, we can talk a little bit more with Jared about what he saw there and also acknowledge this lovely compliment and thanks from Jared and Becky Evans watching with us live here on Facebook. Just wanted to say thanks to Jared for being on during the 1 a.m. tornado warning. It was scary, but you kept us up to date with the possible rotation and where it could be headed. Thank you very much. That's from Becky, Jared. So our appreciation to you. Walk us through a little bit of what they found in South Carolina when they had a chance to go out and look at that storm damage.
Yeah, so they ended up finding 7 tornadoes here. And James, actually, let's keep the map up. I think that's
Sure.
a good
guide
idea.
me.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Let's start at the furthest south one. That's Ladies Island there in Beaufort County, and so that one was an EF0, fairly short lived, as you can see, but it was an EF0 with an 85-mile-an-hour winds. Went about 2 miles, a little over 2 miles, and about 60 yards wide. So roughly a little more than a football field, a little more than half a football field there. Nobody was hurt. Nobody was killed. And again, this is a nocturnal tornado. This is one of those situations where these tornadoes are striking at night. As many of you who are watching, you got woken up by those tornado warnings, and that was a situation that we were concerned about most of the day, and unfortunately, it did come to pass. So again, we had 2 tornadoes on Ernesto Beach. We had one in the south that was a EF1 with 90-mile-an-hour winds. We had another one, which was actually the strongest one that was confirmed, which was an EF1 with 97-mile-an-hour winds. And you can see some of the photos here, some of the damage that was done. There was roof decking removed. There was shingles, siding, air conditioning units were thrown from the roof of an end market. So I mean, again, 97 miles an hour, just that little spin up, did a fair bit of damage. And this was actually the strongest tornado that the Weather Service confirmed in Charleston's area of responsibility. Now, Wilmington didn't confirm any tornadoes in South Carolina. All their tornadoes were in North Carolina. So we're looking at, so we're taking a peek at right here. Again, they weren't on the ground very long, and they weren't terribly wide.
Yeah,
and they were just EF1s, but they still did plenty of damage. And this is why we want everybody taking shelter from those. Even an EF0 can cause problems. We had one that happened on Kiowa. This EF0 that happened on Kiowa, max wind of 85 miles an hour, was on the ground for about a mile and about 150 yards wide. And it didn't create a lot of damage coming ashore, but there were some trees and limbs snapped.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really a tree snapper. We saw a debris signature on this one. I remember when we were watching this, those were the trees that were being lofted in the air, 2,000, 3,000 feet, being picked up by the radar beam. So again, this thing lofted debris that we could see on the radar that night. And that's how we were able to let people on Kiowa Island know that we had very high confidence that a tornado was down and on the ground. So
it's amazing they only confirmed one, given how many areas of rotation you were watching that night.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, and I'll give them, it was insane. There was a lot more rotations offshore. Of course, they can't survey those, but it's like, all right, get in the National Weather Service dinghy and go out and survey this water spout. Yeah, that doesn't work like that.
Where do you want me to go next here?
So let's go to West Ashley. So this is the one that brought us back on the air. and this one ended up being down. We didn't see a debris signature from this one, but again, like we said, does not mean that it was not down. This one started around Citadel Mall, cut up through, basically followed Glen McConnell Parkway in Charleston. So this is actually very close to where I live. This is less than a mile. It ended up less than a mile from where I live.
We're almost lucky you were still on the air.
Yeah, in hindsight, being 2015 with laser correction, I should have been in the laundry room. So I'm just going to put that out there. I probably should have. I probably should have done a little bit more.
Done what you practiced what you preach.
I should have done a little bit more, but it was just enough to where I was reasonably confident that I'd be okay. But again, don't try that at home. If you get the warning, go.
No, because if you got a tree like this through your house, Jared, that would be
it's no good. I mean, and we had several of those. As it kind of hop, skipped, and jumped was the idea with this one before lifting in Shadow Moss, which is an area that is really known for its flooding too. And fortunately did not see the impacts that we saw. And then there was another tornado on Isle of Palms, a very brief tornado, but it did plenty of damage. This was another EF0, and actually, no, correction, it was an EF1, 87 mile an hour winds, about 75 yards wide. I was on the ground for less than a mile, but it tossed a bunch of trees. There was a lot of home damage there. James is going to pull up some of the photos here. A lot of trees on homes, things like that. Isle of Palms also was dealing with a lot of flooding at the time too. So Isle of Palms was in a rough state there for a couple days. As you can imagine, there were some shingles removed, things like that. But yeah, it was more of a tree snapper, and it ended up in the Intercoastal Waterway. And then finally, the tornado that was in Monk's Corner, and this one got a little bit of
many damage reports right here.
Yeah, this one got a lot of notoriety for the video that popped up for the surveillance video of the truck that was being flipped. This was also an EF1 with max winds of 95 miles an hour, and as you see, the Arby's here took the Arby's, Walmart here took a major hit. Blew out the windows in the Arby's, blew out the seats in the Arby's. I mean, some of the photos that I saw from what was inside there after the fact was, very, very bad. And then 2 days later, basically in this same area, they get hit with flash flooding. And they have to do, they're doing, that Friday night, James, we're talking about water rescues. They did 20 water rescues in Monk's Corner.
I don't doubt it.
Yeah. So again, you can see the damage here from this tornado. And again, very short lived. It hop, skipped, and jumped, and lifted just before it got to Lake Moultrie.
Look at this picture. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's 95. That's an EF1. That's an EF1 tornado.
That's an EF1. Audio listeners, I'm going to emphasize what we're seeing in this picture. Jared's already said it, but the windows are boarded up after being blown out, and the seats from inside the Arby's are blown into the parking lot.
Yep. Arby's, they don't have the seats nor the meats. And I mean, it was bad. It was really, it was scary. And then, we'll have to find the video find some cleared video of that car flipping. You can find it on social media, but I mean, it flipped a truck right on top of another truck. I mean, it was, that was quite, that was quite a rotation. And so again, nocturnal tornadoes, that was the thing that we were concerned about. And that's what we ended up getting, unfortunately. And they did,
really did.
And in their local areas, they did a fair bit of damage. And so,
absolutely.
Yeah, it was definitely a busy night.
Again, Jared, thank you for those 1 a.m. Tornado warnings from CHSWX and here on the Carolina Weather Group. I'll say that we try to get to as many of them as possible. Jared alluded to it a little bit during coverage. We all have day jobs, many of which are in weather. But if we can be here in the evening hours during another time, we will be here. I also know so many of you watched our Carolina WeatherNet, which streams for free on YouTube with live radar, sky cams, and real-time warnings from the Weather Service. So we do try to provide that automation when one of us cannot be here in the seat. So thank you to many of you who tuned in for that coverage. We appreciate you trusting us with all of that. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to shift gears. We got a couple of other orders of business we want to get to tonight before we wrap up. We'll be back in 30 seconds. You're watching the Carolina Weather Group.
Have you ever seen what an indoor environmental assessment looks like in a commercial building or business? During a full assessment, we collect data throughout the building and compare the measurements room to room. We can also collect samples that go to a lab, such as the small cassette shown here, which will be analyzed for types and amounts of mold in the air. We follow up with a physical inspection, looking for moisture sources and using moisture meters to determine if any of your building materials are wet.
Go-ESG.com or 336-373-1538. Welcome back to the Carolina Weather Group for this August 14th, 2024. James Brierton and Charlotte, along with Jared Smith. We just finished talking about Tropical Storm Debby, and I just kind of wanted to mention a couple other things, and then we're going to end with a lighter laugh so we can raise our spirits a little bit after talking about what a historic and impressive and devastating storm that came on through. I want to let everyone know, please save the date, Saturday, October 5th. From 10 a.m. to 2 p.m., the Carolina Weather Group will be at GSP Airport, just across the street from the National Weather Service for WeatherFest 2024. We will be in the cell phone lot. That's the overflow parking lot there at the GSP Airport. It's in Greer, South Carolina, Saturday, October 5th, 2024, from 10 until 2. Come hang out with me. We're going to have our green screen out there. You can try being a broadcast meteorologist. If you weren't able to join us at Shield Museum for Weatherproof, it'll be a very similar setup when we make our first trip to upstate South Carolina. So we're looking forward to that. Apply pressure. Maybe Jared will make the drive across South Carolina to come hang out with us and our pals from the National Weather Service. We know that Frank Strait and Melissa Griffin from the South Carolina Climate Office will also be there. They have that fabulous data we use tonight. And if you want to come see just an excellent presentation from them in the field, they always have great knowledge and games for the kids to play, and you'll walk away with some swag too. So they got some good stuff. I guess our table, I'll have to restock our little vinyl stickers so people can come get some Carolina Weather Group stickers from us.
Yeah. I need to re-swag.
Yes. Also coming up in the next few weeks here on the Carolina Weather Group, maybe a reason to hit subscribe if you're not already subscribed. But Frank Strait, who I just mentioned, a co-host of our Carolina Weather Group podcast, probably on the 28th or in the week thereafter, is going to indulge me. So when we first met Frank here in the Carolina Weather Group, he had just left AccuWeather. He was in State College, Pennsylvania, where he was a radio meteorologist for many, many years. As a Rock Hill native, he worked in Pennsylvania and was on radio stations across the country, including a radio station I grew up with in the New York area, WCBS News Radio 880. Well, that format, home of legacy CBS News, is going away in the end of the month after nearly 60 years of providing the New York City tri-state area with all news. I mean, I remember listening to this during the blackout of 2003. Lots of people listened to it during Hurricane Sandy, when all else fails, even in the 21st century, going back to terrestrial radio. Well, they are going to be retiring that all news format. And I want to just talk with Frank a little bit about what it was like covering some of those big storms and the role radio played then and now. And I'm bringing it up because I don't think I'm the only person in the Carolinas from the New York area. You know who you are. So you too probably listen to WCBS News Radio 880 at some point. And if not, and this is the reason I'm bringing it up right now, because I realize not everyone is from New York and the Carolinas. It feels like it sometimes, Jared, but not everyone. There's a lot of us, I admit. You can pick up the station at night on a terrestrial radio. Once that sun goes down and we lose that solar radiation, you can actually pick it up. It is a clear channel station. Going back to the early days of radio, before the internet and TV, they wanted everyone to be able to be reached in case of emergency. And so they designated these stations across the country to have these clear channel signals, and they're one of them. And I bring that up because, indulge me, folks, if you're in the car in the next week and a half, just switch on over to the AM dial and listen to a few minutes of this on 880 AM. I don't care how you feel about politics. You may feel a particular way about the way news is presented. It's not news talk. It is news headlines. It is traffic and weather together every 10 minutes. I'm probably talking too long about this, I realize, but I just want to give everybody a chance to go experience it for themselves for maybe about 10-ish minutes before we talk to Frank about it in a few weeks here on the Carolina Weather Group, because it played a role in my life. And I suspect people at home have their own version of these stories with their own hometown stations.
Yeah, I'll tell you, I love picking up those Clear Channel, not to be confused with the company Clear Channel, which I think has merged into a bunch of other things since then.
That's right.
It's a lot of fun. I personally love listening to AM radio at night when I'm on a long drive. Pick up I remember driving into downtown Charleston from the upstate South Carolina like years ago, and I couldn't find anybody who was carrying the World Series until I stumbled upon ESPN radio from Chicago, and I had a and a clear signal all the way down from down into downtown, and only started breaking up once they started getting around the tin roofs. I think the other thing too, James, is that, you know, the straight news, weather, traffic,
Right.
that format is, I think people aren't going to realize what they had until it's completely gone. And I think we could use a little bit more of that.
Yeah, I think we could too. Maybe in some light, we're lucky it held on this long. There are stations who will continue past the end of the month. For how much longer, we don't know. Not to sound melodramatic, but that's why I'm like, hey, go check this out if you haven't already. Maybe it'll make an impact on you. Maybe it'll inspire you. Maybe we can dream about getting it here in the Carolinas sometime. But anyway, that's coming up in the next few weeks on the Carolina Weather Group. And before we go, Jared, before we hopped on tonight, just as we were starting to hop on tonight, my Facebook, my Twitter, what we sometimes call weather Twitter, was starting to light up about something pretty funny that happened. Did you happen to catch it right before we came on TV, on ABC?
No.
Okay. I'm going to play 25 seconds of tonight's episode of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. It may result in our stream getting taken down off of YouTube or Facebook instantly, but Meta and YouTube, give me like less than 30 seconds to fair use this. This is Jimmy Kimmel hosting the current edition of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire with the actors from Scrubs who played JD and Turk.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm going to leave our mics on. Listen to the question. Are you ready?
All right, let's do it.
10 questions away from $1 million for $2,000. While the other choices are actual names of TV weather forecasters, which of these people testified in a high-profile trial in 2024?
I know what it is already, Jimmy.
Amy Freeze, Larry Sprinkle,
There he is.
Stormy Daniels, Ken Weathers.
Larry Sprinkle representing
Oh my goodness.
on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire tonight.
I mean, and again, Larry Sprinkle, that is about as good of a weather name as you could ask for.
The man is a delight to work with.
Yeah.
I'm glad he got a little national shout out.
That's
I
pretty
think
cool.
I probably wish it wasn't a question involving
Yeah.
what it was, but
Yeah. At least he was the weather forecaster and not the one testifying.
he was not the answer to the question, just to be
Yes.
clear.
Yes. He was not my final answer.
I think that was the $2,000 question, in case anybody was trying to gauge at home whether or not they would have won any money on the question.
I would hope so.
I it was just as we came on, I was like, I have to go grab this clip.
That's great. That's great.
So there you go. Watching this show and being well versed in the Carolina weather community could win you $2,000 one day.
Who knows?
But who knows? Well, Jared, it was good to see you. Hopefully you've gotten some sleep, get some more. Appreciate all your coverage during Debbie. Appreciate all our new followers who have joined us on YouTube and Facebook or audio podcast. Like, subscribe, hit the bell. We say all those things. I know it's really annoying. Every YouTuber says them, but they really do make a difference to help the algorithm help us break through. And if you've just discovered us and you're liking what you see, hopefully you'll share it with a friend, share it with a neighbor. And we're also always willing to take your feedback. We got some feedback during some of our early coverage, and we responded to it and tried to improve upon the way we were doing coverage throughout the week and throughout the years here on the Carolina Weather Group. And also, do stay tuned. We are now over 500 episodes, but we still have our big 500th episode celebration, special anniversary episode coming. And I think we finally nailed down a date to go to our top secret location to film it, Jared. So if that aren't enough reasons to get subscribed, I don't know what is.
I don't know.
But enjoy the calm, beautiful, cooler weather that we have during the remainder of this week. I know here in Charlotte, we'll start to get back into the 90s and the humidity by this weekend. Go figure. But until then, I'm going to enjoy taking a nice 5-minute walk on lunch breaks at work because it is quite nice and a little fall-like in the morning. So.
Yeah, you're definitely getting more of the fall. Like, I mean, we're going to get into the 60s Friday morning, which is, I'm just happy about that. I mean, we're going to get
open the windows weather.
Yeah, we're going to get back to 90 later in the day. So the windows will go right back shut. But hey, you know, I ain't complaining. Mid-August, it can be a lot worse. And it has been a lot worse.
It's very true. We'll be tracking fall foliage with Evan Fisher before we know it.
Oh, yes.
All right. That does it for this week. We'll see you back here next week, every Wednesday, for a new episode of the Carolina Weather Group podcast. Be well. Talk to you again soon. Bye-bye.